I'm Scott Whittam from Whittam Planning and Design, and on behalf of the Chainworks District project team, thank you all for coming out tonight on a rainy Tuesday evening to hear our latest presentation. We were last in front of you in April when we talked about some of our initial plans. They've come a ways. We're now in the process of looking at the zoning for the area, both a PDZ, planned development zone in the town, and a PUD, a planned unit development in the city. And we'll talk a little bit, in fact, quite a bit more about that in terms of the details a little later on. Just the general shape of tonight, we have about an hour here together. We have a little extra time after we need it until they want to put a film on, which makes a lot of sense. We're going to give our presentation in about 20 minutes and then have a good 40 minutes after that for a back and forth for questions and for a conversation with those of you here. I'm going to hand this over in a minute to Mayor Myrick, who will make some comments, and then members of the team will give our presentation. So without any further ado, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here. Is this better? Ooh, that's kind of nice too here in the theater. I feel like I'm the coming attraction, and this is the main event. You know, this is heartening for me to see this many people here for a public discussion so many months before we see any actual action on a site. I'll tell you that this kind of community engagement this early on bodes well for the future of this project. And I want to thank the development team and everyone at Chainworks District for organizing these. You might have noticed that the city of Ithaca is going through a lot of changes. Some of them difficult changes, but mostly positive changes. In a lot of ways, we are leading a renaissance right now. We have, over the last 3 years, added jobs faster than any other community in New York State. We now have the lowest unemployment rate in all of the state, and for the first time this year, our housing growth is beginning to catch up. We went 2.5 decades without any change in our housing stock, and what that has meant is that thousands of people have been priced out of living in the city of Ithaca. Some of them newcomers who wanted to build a home and a family here, some people who had lived here for generations and lost their homes and lost their place in their neighborhoods. But we've seen new housing growth now, and we're beginning to see that growth impact not only the businesses and the stores on the Commons who are doing well. Our vacancy rate on the Commons is now half of what it was when we began construction there. Right? There are more businesses open than there were when we began construction. But it's beginning finally to affect our tax rate. This year we'll see a 6.16% increase in the assessed value in the city of Ithaca. That's the fastest growth in years and years and years. Right? What that growth has meant, along with some difficult choices through our budget, is that in 2013, the first budget that I created, 2013, had the lowest tax increase in it since the year 2000. The tax increase that we had last year was even lower than that. Right? But this renaissance will not be complete. This transformation will not be complete until two things. First, we finished the construction on the Commons. Has anybody noticed the construction on the Commons? Have you seen that? I haven't gotten any emails about it, so I was wondering. No, I'm kidding. Until we do that, and then second, until we take this property, this 95 acres, just blocks away from one of the premier higher ed institutions in the state, and just blocks away from our downtown, right? Until we take that and we transform it together into something that's not only valuable, but into something that makes Ithaca a place that's even more lovable and even more livable. So that's where the PUD comes in, the planned unit development zone. If I could talk for just a minute about why we had to, or why council felt it was appropriate to create this zone. Now zoning, I know many of you know this, so forgive me for the primer, but zoning was created to make sure that what's being developed fits within the context of an existing neighborhood, and that the use that happens within those developments are compatible with the surrounding environment, right? Now, 150 years ago, that meant something very different than it does now. Right? Or 100 years ago, when we saw our neighborhoods like Fall Creek develop, what it meant was we knew we wanted buildings that were about 30 or 40 feet tall. We knew we wanted them to be 50 or 60 feet wide, and we knew that each parcel was going to be dedicated to residential use. Now, you don't want to go ahead planning every single one of those parcels, parcel by parcel. You don't want to drag Common Council and the planning board and the entire community through a design process for each one of those parcels if you know that it's going to look more or less the same and it's going to function more or less the same, right? So zones are created in order to provide stability and to establish a context, and in some cases to reinforce an existing character, right? Now, when you look at the Chainworks district, all of that doesn't work for the Chainworks district, right? We don't have any other 95-acre parcels inside the city of Ithaca that were formerly industrial, and of course we don't have any that are right in a row. So how can we create a zone that treats the redevelopment of this area as delicately and as flexibly as we'll need to? And how can we ensure that the community has their needs served as well as the developer? Well, council decided, led by chair of the planning committee, Seth Murtaugh, who's here tonight, council decided that the very best way to do this is to create a planned unit development zone. What this now means is that beginning from this meeting and through several public meetings, public hearings, meetings of the planning board, and finally acts of common council, the community will get to decide alongside the developer what gets built, what uses are permitted, what sort of transportation and traffic engineering solutions are incorporated into the design. And we all get to do that together. So the most important thing I can tell you is that I know these developers are committed. They've been committed for some years now. The best thing that you can do is what you've already done: show up. Show up not just tonight, but in the meetings to come, over the months and months that are left in this process. If you can't make it, follow the news, sign up for the newsletter, forward it to your neighbors, invite them to come to the process as well. Because if we do this the way it's supposed to be done, if we do it the way that it should be done, we'll all contribute to a better South Hill and an even better city of Ithaca. So thank you, and thank you for being here. Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As is often the case, you were far more articulate than any of us are going to be, and now we're going to say the same thing for 10 or 15 minutes badly. But thank you for encapsulating our entire talk tonight. We'll hear, first I'll introduce our team, and then we'll hear an overview of where we are with the design and thinking of the project, some of the planning. Our main conversation is about this zoning, and as the mayor just mentioned, what does this zoning mean, and what are our initial intentions in terms of this site? And then we'll talk about where it is in schedule and how it might move forward. And as I said at the beginning, most of this will be for a question and answer at the end. So without any further ado, David Lubin is here, and David represents Unchained Properties. He's sitting in the front row down here. Not with us tonight, but Paul Silvestri from Harder Seacrest Emery is our environmental attorney. Chantrell Jensen Stark, architect, CJS out of Rochester, and Craig Jensen is here this evening. Dirt Studios we're working with out of Virginia. Austin Marigold, and some of you might know Alexander Marigold from Cornell. We're working with them in terms of our outreach. Fagin Engineers, and we have Jamie Gensel tonight here. Myself, Noah Demarest from Stream Collaborative, in the middle of Craig and Jamie over here. And also, most importantly, we have Labella Engineers not here this evening working on our environmental consulting. So with that, I think I'll hand it over, Craig, to you to do an overview, and then we'll go from there.
So we're going to give you a quick overview of the project. We did some of this at a previous public meeting, and then Noah will give you the kind of zoning talk that really is the meat of this meeting. So here's the property from the air. I think everyone's fairly familiar. Go ahead, Scott. We've got some historical images that have been unearthed by members of the project team. As everyone knows, I think this was previously Morse Chain. There was a lot of activity on this site, prior to it going dormant in the last few years. Really a lot of activity, and we hope to really re-energize this site with this adaptive reuse. That's just some historical images. So these are some precedent images. This is not the first time that someone has taken an industrial site and adaptively reused it for new purposes. So this is one in Rhode Island. This is one in Massachusetts that you may or may not be familiar with. We hope to bring some of that kind of life to the Chainworks district. This is a little sketch of the site showing kind of the hill cascading down towards the city, which would be to your left, view of Cornell in distance. And the site will be mixed use. It will be a combination of living environments, working environments, and then public spaces or collect spaces for all kinds of activities to take place throughout the site. There's some photos we'll show you. This is just a couple of shots of the interior of some of the buildings for those of you who have not had the opportunity to get inside. And some of these we've started to do some initial vignettes to show, how a space like this could be transformed into something like this as a gateway into a portion of the complex. Similarly, this is a view on the lower side of the site, and it could be transformed into a mixed-use environment with active spaces. Next, Scott. Like this, perhaps during the day, or like this, perhaps in the evening. So that gives you a little sense of where we're going with the kind of identity, but these are just kind of initial concept sketches. This shows the overall kind of network of trails going through the site. I should probably let Noah speak to this. He's a little, or Scott, you've got a mic.
Any of us really, is this mic working as well? Good.
Yeah.
There's a link in a trail network that has been closed, as many of you know, for many, many years. And we plan as part of this project to reopen that trail and connect that link yet again. It's an important piece of our planning, and those conversations are moving forward. So we're very much looking forward to that, to re-linking this trail system. I could speak to this,
ahead.
It's just in terms of driving along 96. This project can't really be seen all that well. One knows it mainly from the parking lots, from Wegmans, or from areas distant, even from West Hill. You see it very clearly, or from Cornell. But it really is very, very close to the city. It's I know from our experience, it's about a 10-minute walk from where we are right now. And so it really is linked in. It's part of our urban fabric, and our intention is to, again, reconnect it to the downtown core.
I mean, as you see there, it's really closer to downtown than Cornell is to downtown. It's really part of the downtown.
Closer than College Town.
Right.
As well.
Yeah. So this shows the overall complex of existing buildings on the site. There's about a little over 800,000 square feet of space on this site currently, and we're going to selectively remove certain portions of that 800,000 square feet to open the site up and create public spaces within the site. So the buildings that are shown in yellow there are currently thought of as our potential removals that would open it up. These buildings have kind of grown together over time. So by taking selectively buildings away, we can start to create public spaces and streets and squares and more facades for windows and the reuse of the buildings that remain. So there's those buildings coming out showing the potential either green spaces or courtyards that would be created.
And we might also note that many of you saw as you came in, we have a model of the site that was begun by Austin Marigold, and is continuing to be worked on as part of the project that we have here as well.
That does not yet show the potential new development, but here again now you can see those same buildings with some potential uses starting to be designated within the buildings. And certain buildings are better suited to certain uses, and it really makes sense for us to have a mixed-use neighborhood here because these buildings really lend themselves to a variety of uses, not to a single use. And with that, I'm going to hand this to Noah, who's going to really go into the zoning.
So since the real topic here for tonight is about the PUD and this new process for the city, we think it makes a lot of sense to take a really big step back and think about zoning and the context within which this site sits. And so what this map illustrates is this is something we've put together part of a different project, but one of the things I'm involved with the city and the town right now is looking at ways of really streamlining and helping make the zoning codes more understandable. So what you see here is a composite of all the zoning zones, land use zones, within both the city and the town of Ithaca. And you can kind of see there's quite a complexity to this. And there's one of the things that's great right now that's happening is between the city and the town and their comprehensive planning process, there's a lot of coordination going on at the comprehensive plan level. And the very next step is to really work on making the zoning fall in line with the goals of the comprehensive plans. So we're involved with that in other fronts, but we're also involved with the Chainworks, and we see the PUD and the PDZ in the town as a real opportunity to do this intermunicipal coordination because we happen to be right on the line between the city and the town. So this is an example of a transect-based zoning code. This comes out of the SMART code. This is just one example of how we could really simplify our zoning. I apologize for the flickering. It's a wireless connection, so there's some interference. But so this is just another way of thinking about it. So instead of all that complexity, how could we simplify this and sort of reclassify our neighborhoods into different zones that's more understandable? So what the SMART code has done is just one example, again, that we're using as a reference as we begin this process, really takes all of the land use from the natural zone on the left through a series of sort of edge zones, urban edge zones, suburban zones, into an urban core. And then all the way on the right are your special districts, which would be your kind of institutions, your campuses, your large shopping areas, like your big box stores. Those would be in special districts. So I just wanted to introduce this as a concept because what we're going to be doing is zooming in on some of these zones in our particular site. We don't have this entire transect, but we want to show the context. And as we begin to do that, we need to understand the amount of density that's going to be planned for this site. So at this point, we really don't know how many units would be, how many residential units, how much office space. These are the types of things we're starting to talk about. So one of the things we've done is an analysis of all of the density in the entire town and city right now, so we can understand how many units per acre, for example. That's one measure of density, how many residential units in an acre. So as you can see here, the green is less than 0.5 units per acre, which is most of the town of Ithaca. And as you move closer to the core, you get greater and greater density. And we have, the red spots are 12 units to 40 units. That's our highest level of density. And that happens mostly in College Town, surprisingly very little in downtown, which is something that we're hoping as a community is starting to change, as the mayor talked about. So we potentially are looking at some orange-red color, potentially more like College Town, on the Chainworks site, which is right now green. Go ahead. So again, just to take a step back and look at the larger zoning context, I want to just give a little flavor of what each of these zones generally are understood to represent, or images that represent these zones kind of all across the country. So these are not Ithaca projects or Ithaca sites, but this is a natural zone. So you'll see on our site, we are proposing some natural zones, areas that will be more or less untouched. Won't have waterfalls necessarily, but something like this represents a natural zone. And the next one may be something close to what we have, because we have a trail that will run through a wooded area that will remain wooded. So this is also a natural zone. And then as you move to the next level in the transect, the T2 or rural zone, this is something we see all over Ithaca as well, but this is, could be, I believe this is Vermont, but it could be anywhere in New England as a more agricultural use, farmhouse type use in a T2 or rural zone. And same sort of image here. So again, I'm showing these for context and to illustrate that some of these zones are things we're not going to be doing, but some of them are pictures or images of things that we will be proposing. So this is our neighborhood edge zone, or a more suburban zone. This could be also somewhere in Ithaca. It's not. It could be in many communities in America where you have a front yard. You may or may not have a sidewalk. The houses are still fairly close together, but it's definitely not an urban type of development. And so this T3 or neighborhood edge zone is probably not something that we're going to see in our site because of our proximity to downtown, our walkability and transit and so forth. Next image, I think another T3 or neighborhood edge zone, just an example. This is from Providence, Rhode Island. Next one. So here we're getting into what we call the neighborhood general zone, which is a T4 zone. This is Newport, Rhode Island. This could be Sears Street downtown near Gimme Coffee. You know, you can see this type of thing in our Fall Creek neighborhood where the houses are very close together. They're pushed right to the sidewalk. There's a mix of some commercial sort of corner cafe type uses mixed in. We will be proposing most likely something like this on our site. So this is what we call T4. Another one, neighborhood general zone, T4, sort of 3-story, maybe sometimes 4-story kind of row housing mixed with garden spaces. This is in Chicago, I believe. And this is the next zone, which you'll also see that we are proposing the sort of neighborhood center zone. We can see a much more dense urban form. There's streets with on-street parking. The buildings are pushed right to the street. There are buildings on the site existing that have some of this character, so it would make sense to define our zone center as this type of T5 or neighborhood center zone. And then this is another one, a contemporary project, which would also fall into that classification of a T5 neighborhood center zone. And you can see how there's a public space created within the buildings and how they form this public plaza space as well. And one of the things to point out, actually, just about this, about the architectural styles that you see here vary quite a bit. And so as we talk about transect-based zoning or form-based zoning, we're not necessarily talking about architectural style. We're really talking about the physical aspects of the building and where they're located on the site. How close to the sidewalk are they? How pushed away from the sidewalk they are? Where are the cars? Where are they parking on the street, off the street, behind the buildings? All of those types of things are things we're going to be looking at. And then this is a T6 or your central business district. And so this is also Chicago. This is not what we're proposing on this site. We're not going to have buildings this tall. Your T6 or central business district really has your institutional buildings, your civic buildings, your museums in this case, your cultural center. And so we're going to have more of that T5 or neighborhood center and neighborhood general zone as well as a natural zone. So if you go to the next slide, in order to sort of define where these different zones or subzones or areas would happen, we looked first at the topography because we have a very steep site We have steep slopes that we know would be very difficult to build on. It's just not practical, and it just doesn't make sense environmentally for us to do that, economically. So in looking at the site, we've identified areas that have steep slopes greater than 15%. And we took that 15% from the USGBC, the United States Green Building Council, has a standard or guideline called LEED for Neighborhood Development. And we're using that as kind of a good base for some of our decision making. And so they have a cutoff at 15%. It happens to coincide roughly with what the town of Ithaca has. The city of Ithaca is also working on a steep slopes ordinance as well. And so looking at that, we can see that roughly of the 95 acres, there's, I forget the number, maybe 40 acres or so, 41 acres, that are actually less than 15% currently. So right off the bat, we know that probably 50% or so, maybe a little bit higher, of this site will not have any development on it at all, potentially. And so we use this map to go to the next image to start to define sub-areas that make some sense within the context of this larger discussion about form-based codes. And so the T1, or your natural zone, the lighter purple on the right-hand side there, is that really steep slope area. And so that's an area that we really don't anticipate any sort of major development, aside from a walking trail, or perhaps a trailhead, you know, a parking area to get on the trail, something like that. So that was pretty easy right off the bat. The next two areas we're still in the middle of trying to define the edges and the boundaries and how these things would work. But at this point, our initial take on this is that the character along Route 96, or the existing zoning along Route 96, should be more or less maintained the way that it is now. So that the current zoning is roughly in line with the T4 neighborhood general zone. So that's where you might see townhouse type development, so a mix of single family and multifamily homes, but it's really residential in character. And so that's what we've done, is we did an offset of about 100 feet off of the property line on Route 96, and that just matches up with a lot of those properties that are already there. So we're using that as kind of a base for the T4. And then on the right-hand side there's an area that is less than 15% slope that's undeveloped now. And so we think that it makes sense, if that was to be developed in the future, that it would be a continuation of that T4 type neighborhood general zone, as opposed to a more heavy, intense development. Then that leaves the rest of the site. So at this point, just given the nature of the types of buildings that are there now, it seems to make sense to designate that entire area as a neighborhood center, as a T5. And so the real goal here is to develop the existing buildings first. So we really don't know where this is going to go into the future, but as we go through this process of writing the PUD or writing the zoning laws for this site, we need to think about the future, even though the real emphasis here is on these existing buildings. So that's the primary area that we're talking about. And it has a mix, and you can see in the model over there, there's a mix of existing buildings with very large parking lots that are there. They were there for the factory use, which may no longer be relevant, but they also represent opportunities for other types of uses on the site. I think I'm going to hand it back to Scott.
Just to wrap up, and then we really want to get to your questions and concerns and have a conversation. So we're now in an active dialogue with the town to help work with them to draft a PDZ, and we have initiated a conversation with the city to draft a PUD, and they really are essentially identical, although they have two different names. And we feel, and the initial thoughts from both the town and the city, is that this is an ideal opportunity for intermunicipal communication and coordination. And so that's ongoing. We're looking at potential joint meetings and to even craft a single document for both municipalities. So that's very exciting, and that's ongoing right now and will be into the fall and into the winter. So We hope to see you at some of those meetings. There'll be more public meetings. And with that, I think we really want to put up the lights if we can, Vicky, and hear some of your thoughts and some of your questions. Yes.
As I understand it, the only...
Why don't I give you this?
Hi, my name is Daniel Keogh. I'm a chairperson of the city's Bike Pedestrian Council, and I'm just wondering when the trail will be open. As I understand it, the only thing standing in the way is a chain link fence.
We currently don't own the property. It's currently the property is Emerson's, and so what's keeping that chain link fence there is not our ownership. So when that transfer of ownership happens, then we'll have the ability to take down that fence, which I think the hiking and cycling community has been looking forward to for a long, long time. So it's in our plans, it's forthcoming. We're still in that negotiation, and we, as well as you, are looking forward to that coming down. Do you want to? We'll take that.
Okay. Well, if everybody could just state your name and any other relevant information before you ask the question.
I'm John Oakley. I'm a neighbor of Building 21 on Turner Place. I'm basically, as we go into this planned unit development, in the normal zoning process, there's a stage when the neighborhood can come in and have input on rather small changes in people's houses and stuff like that. So what's the process going to be as you develop your plans for the community to have input, and what sort of legal rights is the community going to have input?
I don't think in terms of the PUD and putting together a new zone, I don't think anything changes substantially in terms of process. So this is a public meeting prior to, obviously, clearly any decisions being made, even before Council has received a draft of some of the things that we're looking at this evening as a formal submission. That will be a series of meetings, dialogue between the project team and both the Planning Committee of Council and the Council as a whole in the city. So there'll be a series of public meetings and public information sessions as that moves forward. This is all prior to any site plan submission for any master planning. The project will have to go through planning board before even any of this becomes official. So we're looking at a process of somewhere between 6 months, 9 months, perhaps even longer, that will be in front of the city in different ways with this project. Talking about both the zone as a whole, as a concept, and then the actual proposals. So as any site plan process or as any zoning amendment or variance process, it won't differ from those in terms of your opportunity as a neighbor. And John, we look forward to talking with you as that moves forward.
Good evening. Yes, my name is Bill Parmet. I live at 132 South Hill Terrace, which is directly downslope from the Chainworks. My principal concern, it's not really a question, but one that I want to bring up early on and state to your group is the impact of traffic on the local streets that would undoubtedly be generated by increased residential usage at this planned unit development. I live on South Hill Terrace, as I say, and I sometimes jokingly refer to my corner as slippery slope and crash corners because we routinely have accidents there in the winter because of the very steep slope of the adjoining street. Last winter was really pretty good. The winter before we had 7 accidents there. And so, in just trying to imagine what you're trying to imagine, I expect that there would be increased traffic from this site, probably going to Wegmans or Barnes & Noble or some of these places. And some of the convenient shortcuts from that area to the strip mall area present some significant difficulties for motorists. And so I would just, for the record, put it before you that significant thought should be given to how to handle traffic coming from that site and how it would impact both the people trying to navigate those streets and the people that currently live on them. I did have one question. I think I have the right sections, but is this PUD subject to the sections 239 L and M of the General Municipal Law, and will it need to be referred to the County Planning Board?
Yes. The simple answer is yes. Going back to the traffic portion, we are one of the names that's not listed on our team list who we've recently engaged is SRF. Steve Ferrante is going to be our traffic engineer on this project. What we're starting to do is going through background conditions, starting to assess potential traffic impacts and conditions existing and future. We also are going to look at historically too. So over time, traffic has changed, but what we'll do is create a baseline for the traffic study and then look at the potential as we develop the site as a whole, and it'll be done in incremental phases. Part of that is to determine how many trips this will generate, and this is all dependent on the uses and then the amount of space dedicated to those uses. So we've already started that process. That will be part of the generic environmental impact study that we'll be doing, which will be coordinated through the city and the town, and then that will also be referred back to the county and all other involved agencies.
Just to add to that, even before there's a lead agency, before a scoping session, before we moved into a potential environmental impact statement, we understand some of the big issues, and transportation is certainly one of them, in traffic. And so, as Jamie said, we've brought on Steve Ferrante now in this process to begin to look at some of that study and to understand it fully as we do our planning.
Jennifer Dotson. I was formerly sitting in Seth's seat at chairing the planning committee, and now I work with TCAT and other transit-related things, and am a neighbor, not of the west-south hill, but let's call it Titus Flats, since it's notably not hilly down there. In fact, sometimes flooding. I really appreciate that comment, because to me, when I'm thinking of those shortcuts, I don't think they really are shortcuts, except to think of maybe cutting your trip short because you slide down the hill. So this is an opportunity, I think, to direct motor traffic away from that neighborhood, maybe emphasize the fact that it's really an excellent pedestrian area. If somebody's trying to get downtown, it's excellent. Driving through there, really not a good idea, except under very specific circumstances, local traffic. So I think this is a great opportunity. I think that the way you've laid out the transects, and maybe, I don't know who's in control of the computer, but seeing the transects, the T41 map would be helpful. I think in a lot of neighborhoods you'd look at this and you'd say, wow, why does the T5, the most intense, go directly to the neighborhood? But I think in this circumstance, given what the buildings look like and what the historical nature of the neighborhood is, I think that's really appropriate. And I don't know, I would be really interested to hear what neighbors would say, but I think that's a general consensus that having attention to this site and how it is sewn together with that neighborhood is really important. So my question, really glad to hear Steve Ferrante is involved in this too. My question is, when you look at the sort of gateway to the site from South Aurora, so I guess it's where that leftmost T4 label is, where the driveway goes in, the lowest driveway. Has there been any thought to making that a little bit more dense, maybe T5, for a couple different reasons? One, it gives sort of a gateway feel as you're driving down the road that's appropriate to have heavier traffic. You have a sense of there's something back there. And also that may help in some level with the transportation, because I know one of the solutions to minimizing the multiple cars going in and out of this site is going to be public transportation. And I know the more you can sew that together and not have a bus route traveling over a less dense area to get to the more dense area, the better that works. So I'm curious about that thinking about having the T4 along the edge completely, or maybe having a couple spots where it actually reaches South Aurora.
So just to clarify, in each of these zones, these subzones as we're calling them, there's a whole range of architectural styles as well as heights, for instance. So there's a baseline of 4 stories, for instance, that would be allowed in a T4. So you could potentially create 4 stories is a lot in a T4. So I mean, you could architecturally create a gateway, without going as far as the T5, which might allow 6 stories or 8 stories. So that's the one caution I would have, is that we could still create a gateway through the site plan review process, rather than allowing that higher density zone to leak into other areas. Similar, even though we're showing T5 on areas that are right up against the edge of the neighbors, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get bigger buildings right there, because there'll be a whole site plan review process, and there could be other buffer zones. There's other mechanisms that we could use to create separation and buffers, even though we're zoning at T5. The other thing is, this is one parcel, so it's somewhat unusual to kind of break it down the way we are. Typically, your zone or your parcel is in one zone, and so we're sort of offering here that we're trying to break it down even further. And so this is just our first stab. I think it's going to shape as we go through this process. The lines will shape and move as we go.
I just want to say, and this shaping of these zones, this is a draft of ours. This represents the beginning of the conversation with the town of Ithaca, and we'll be having this conversation with the city of Ithaca, and it will be a municipal document, not necessarily resembling identically what we are at first as a project team presenting. So it will change in that conversation.
The other thing I'd add is that that historic entrance will no doubt be a gateway into the site, but the idea here is that we'll have multiple entrances. There's a number of entrances that happen along Aurora Street that we plan to make use of, and that won't be necessarily the only, quote, main entrance. So we hope that this site is really knitted back into the fabric of the surrounding area, and you don't necessarily think of it as a dividing line, a gateway between where the site starts and where the city stops. So in that sense, I would just caution that, we would like to kind of blur those distinctions over time, if possible.
Well, just one really quick follow-up. Considering the transition between the T5 and the T1 where there's that curve, there aren't any buildings you're planning on keeping toward that end. So can you talk about the vision for how that transition may potentially work?
Can you repeat part of that question into the mic?
Yeah, I think the question is, how are we going to create the transition between the T1 and the T5, because it's fairly abrupt at the curve that we show between those two zones. There's an existing road there that forms a boundary for us, and it's a pretty natural place to maintain traffic, along that edge. And it seems as though once we cross that line, we really want to preserve the natural landscape. How much of that T5 is built out right to the edge of that road is yet to be determined. But it's still a convenient place, and I think a logical place to draw the line, even if the infrastructure or the built form may or may not press out to the edge. So that's one of the things I think Noah's saying, TBD to some degree.
My name's Joe Harlan. I'm a local activist trying to make changes and fight for growth. You guys mentioned about traffic, it should be placed right in now. I'm going to ask you a question. How'd you handle Morris Chain with their 3,000 people and National Cash Register with their 3,000 people on top of Ithaca College? It should be placed right now. How to handle, how did the Aurora Street handle all that traffic? And it's, shifts. All those places have shifts around the clock. It's not just one shift and gone. So you got 3 different shifts going on throughout those areas, NCR and Morris Chain and Ithaca College. So your problem should be almost solved on what's going on, because it went on before and it can happen again, but you got to get used to it. There's not much change in changing the system on traffic because it's been handled before.
Thanks, Joel. Certainly, in looking at the transportation issues, we'll look at the history of that site. I think the more immediate concerns are the intersections that might be affected by rehabilitating this site, and what that will mean in terms of road condition, road width, numbers. All of those are ably in the hands of SRF of Steve Ferrante to look at. But clearly, there was a time where there were a lot of cars going to the site, and we'll look at that as part of the mix of all this as well. So thank you.
One other item on traffic. When you look at a single use versus multiple uses, peak hours, once we get into this discussion, we look at peak hours and development of a project. A peak hour for Morse Chain or Emerson had specific shifts, 3 times a day that there was all this traffic. When you have a multiple use development, that peak hour gets blended. There's a different peak hour for the residential, there's a different peak hour for the retail, there's a different peak hour for the commercial. So that's part of what we're tasking Steve Ferrante and his team to look into, is to see, okay, what was that Morse Chain or Emerson at certain peaks of their time, and then looking at it as the redevelopment piece and seeing how, there's going to be a number of traffic credits, so-called, between people that actually live there and work there at the same time. Also, mass transit we've been talking about, pedestrian traffic, bike, car sharing. So we'll be looking at all those and to determine, the total trip generation, but then also the pass-by trips, the trips that are generated internally that stay internally as well. So we have the right guy on board to look at that. I believe Mr. Ferrante has worked multiple times with agencies locally. So.
Hi, my name's Jeff Lawless. I have 2 unrelated questions. The first one is, as I'm looking at the T1 in particular, which seems to be not really differentiated yet and a little difficult site to develop, have you guys considered, and I don't know if this is premature, but have you guys considered generation, utility generation on site, and would that be a suitable location for something like that, which could still work with your recreation or your pathways that you're thinking of?
The answer is yes, and we're deciding who's going to answer.
We haven't looked at utility generation on site for the T1 area. I mean, I'm not sure if that's something that would be a logical mix or not, but we can certainly enter into the mix and have the discussion with the developer to see, if that's something that makes sense. It just hasn't come up, to date for that part of the site. I think it has come up as far as, the rooftops of the existing buildings and the possible use of the T5 for utility generation. But the T1, in our minds right now, it's just been a natural zone.
Well, the density that you're talking about, my guess is that rooftop would do a small fraction of what you could do with the T1. But anyhow, I was just curious if you were, I figured you guys were probably thinking of it. The other question I have is a little more general. I'm sorry? speak into the mic. The second question is more of a general nature. I'm curious of the three categories of your, retail, work, recreation, and residential. I'm kind of curious either by square footage or percentages. I'm kind of curious, first of all, what that mix looks like. How many how many people you think you're going to have there, or how many retail units or whatever. Part of it, I'm thinking of that development down on Cayuga Street with the garage that's never been occupied. I mean, it may be a great idea to have retail. Are you intending to use the retail and the work so that it's a more self-sufficient community? Do you intend to have more people working in town, or do you have more people from town coming and shopping in your new district? I'm just kind of curious in terms of the mix of that 800,000 square feet, how much of it is going to be dependent on the rest of the community or vice versa?
I'll take the first stab and just say we really have no idea, first of all, in terms of what that mix will be. But we know that we want to mix. We know that it requires people to create vibrancy. So we need a certain number of people. We're looking at this more as a self-sufficient neighborhood that's walkable, that people can walk downtown, but they can also walk internally. And that's going to take a lot, more than what you might think of, but sort of looking at other neighborhoods in the city, looking at neighborhoods like Fall Creek, for example, and we understand the sort of mix of commercial that happens within that sort of walkable neighborhood. I can imagine something of that level of density of people. We're not as big as Fall Creek. This is only 95 acres. Fall Creek's like 300 acres. So it's not going to be that size, but just as a proportion, there'll be quite a few people. In terms of the programming, I'll let, take a look at it.
Okay, so you can see up there some of the proposed uses for some of these existing buildings, and certain buildings lend themselves very well to certain types of uses within the existing facility. So that's going to drive the use choices that we make to a large degree. There are certain buildings, and only certain buildings, that really work for residential, and it's probably, I'm going to put a very kind of general number on it, it's somewhere in maybe a third of the site is maybe a residential component, right? And then maybe another third is more of a manufacturing or work type component, with the other third being probably office and commercial or entertainment type uses. And that's probably a small third, whereas the other two are big thirds. But we're going to try and get it to balance, but it's really going to be driven by the individual buildings and how they shake out. As you can see, there's some buildings on there that are 4 and 5 stories high. Unfortunately, those are a smaller footprint, and they lend themselves more to a residential type use. And the larger kind of 1-story pancake type structures are not going to work for that. They're going to be either manufacturing or some sort of work environment. Does that give you some sense? With the new development, the new parcels that might be developed around the existing, we have more flexibility, obviously, although the steep slopes are going to still, I think, suggest that these buildings not have huge footprints, and therefore wouldn't as likely be large manufacturing facilities as they would be, office or live work type environments.
I find the one-way streets in the city, Daniel Keogh, I find the city streets that are one-way to be incredibly inconvenient. Cars often go faster in the one-way direction, and it's less convenient for newer drivers. It gets very confusing. And as a destination coming south on Aurora Street up to the hill, are you considering proposing to the city to make Aurora Street fully bi-directional, fully two-way street, which would be more friendly for pedestrians, people on bikes, new people to the area?
We've just initiated our traffic study and are just beginning to look at some of the implications of, as Jamie mentioned earlier, with a mixed-use project, there are certain peaks. There's a lot of data to be gone through before making a recommendation to the city. But I wouldn't place anything out of the range of what might be a recommendation that comes out of the findings.
I believe Steve Frank has studied that.
think he actually had.
Yeah, so as part of the GIS process, we're going to look at existing conditions, develop conditions, then potential mitigation, and pretty much everything will be on the table, and we'll look at all types of potential mitigation as we go. But yeah, I'm sure your group will be included in that conversation as well.
Hi, so I'm Walter Hang. I live here in Ithaca, and I'm just curious. I mean, this site is class 2, significant threat to the public health or the environment, action required, Superfund site. It's never been remediated. It's impacted more than 100 adjoining homes. Is any effort going to be made to remove the high-level solvent contamination, fuel oil contamination, and other residual material that is left over from the chain factory?
Actually, tonight we don't have our environmental consultant. Labella's our environmental consultant, but we're in the process of working with DEC. Emerson, Chainworks, and DEC are partners in developing that final mitigation and characterization of the property. So they're going through that process, and that'll be a total public process, and that'll be part of what we propose on actually as part of this review.
So with all respect, I didn't ask about mitigation, which is reducing. I asked about remediation, which is cleaning up the site to the applicable standards, which are very rigorous.
Yes, the standard that we're actually requesting is higher than what Emerson was looking at before. We're looking at going to a residential level. So that, and I can't speak to the actual minute detail on that. That's part of the next meeting. But that is our goal, is to work with DEC so that we're allowed to have residential development on the site. So for the specifics, we're going to have actually a special meeting just separate for the environmental side. We'll have our environmental engineers at that meeting, and I'm sure they can answer all your questions there.
Yeah, I mean, Walter, clearly, if anyone knows the site and its industrial history, it's you, it's us. We've all looked at this really carefully and are continuing the conversation with DEC and with our project team and with Emerson's ongoing, whether it's remediation, mitigation, removal, all of those decisions are yet to be made in terms of what we're finding. I must say, though, that the project, the fact of the project moving ahead is a positive one in terms of what's existing there, what's been found so far, and the future of that site. So we're all very much looking forward to those exact plans, remediation, removal, mitigation, whatever those mean, and whatever we end up with the data that's coming forth right now. As Jamie mentioned, we're planning a special meeting just on those issues when we're clear about what we know and can say. So thanks very much, and I'm sure we'll continue talking with you, especially as this moves forward.
I'm curious about the architectural plans, and I don't know any of you or how you're actually going to work together on this. Who's the theoretician here? And will this be a real learning process for all of us? I mean, I would like these meetings to be practical, but also I want to really learn something about architecture and about city planning. And this is such a great project. One of the things that I've noticed just in a affordable housing project that is going to be approved tonight, I think, is that the architecture is not very interesting. The property is owned by Cornell, yet the architecture school and landscaping program have nothing to do with it. So it seems like there's some real exciting opportunities to connect with the educational institutions, and since this seems to be a long-term project, there might be some fun things that could happen from this. I mean, I'm really excited about it. I'm very supportive of it. But I'd like to know, in terms of your backgrounds, you know, is there a new urbanist up there?
we could answer that in a lot of different ways, but the team that we have on board right now is in back of me, and certainly in terms of who is the theoretician, I think that we'd have some debate. But Noah and myself have both been engaged in teaching and have a Cornell background, as well as Austin Marigold, Alexander Marigold, who's teaching the architecture school there right now, might claim that theoretician role. Julie Bargeman or David Hill of Dirt Associates, who've done projects similar to this around the country, and some very successfully, might claim that theoretician role, as well as the prime architect for the master planning, Craig, as well. So it will be a very active debate, not only among our team, but one in public over these next coming years. Right now, we're talking about zoning, of course, and the envelope for buildings and heights and numbers. As we're able to get closer to actual project plans, then that conversation will get warmer. Right now, it's beginning to warm up. But there's been no end of conversation within our team, certainly, about what's the nature of the site, what is its connection to its history, what's its connection to the urban core. All those questions will be public questions very soon.
So just to add a little bit, yeah, you're right. It's a great project, and I think because it's really more about a neighborhood than an individual building, the overall design theory behind it really is more, I think, based on, like you say, a newer urbanist model than on a architectural, theory model, I suppose. And I think a lot of it really now is about the public realm that we want to create in and amongst these buildings. So the history of the site and the existing buildings are going to be a large piece of the final product, as well as what's developed new. But I think the public realm and the ability to create that through this kind of transect-based zoning is where we have to start. And then I think the architecture can be layered upon that, but it won't be the success of the project, I think, as much as the overall network of the site.
Hi, my name is Tom Hanna. I've been involved with civic association work. I was also a member of Common Council about 120 years ago, I think it was. My brother used to work at Morris Chain, so I have a kind of special feeling about the spot. But could you do me a favor and put the map back up of the transect zones? And could you tell us where the boundary is between the city and the town?
So which is which?
Sorry, city, town. Some of the buildings are literally split in half by the line. And you can see all of the sort of large undeveloped land is really in the town, although there are a number of parking lots that are really prime redevelopment sites, because there's about 1,000 parking spaces up there, 1,200 parking spaces, and there's no need for 1,200 parking spaces. In terms of the factory uses that once were there, they made a lot of sense, but now even modern manufacturing uses wouldn't require that much. So we see those as potential sites, but that's the line.
I just want to say that all of the presentations are available on the chainworksdistrict.com website. So if you need to download them or review them, we've also made available the video presentation from the first meeting, and we will again take the transcript and the presentation from today and make those available. So chainworksdistrict.com, and you can check them out.
Hi, my name's George McGonigal. I'm on Common Council now, and I'm a friend of John Oakley's. Transportation question. In western Pennsylvania, in cities that have very steep slopes, just like this, they have this thing called inclined planes, in which they can move a lot of people up and down from one place to another. Have you ever thought about something like that for this project?
This actually was the site of the Ithaca Inclined Plane in the early 19th century, right through this site, where rail cars were moved from one rail at the bottom of the slope, pulled up, and put on the other one. So fascinating that actually was right here. Modern inclined planes are entirely different. We've just begun, to look at how transportation might work on the site, both vehicular and pedestrian circulation, moving through the site at all. So nothing is out of the mix at this point. But the idea of recreating an inclined plane is an interesting one in terms of the site's history.
Hello, my name is Cynthia Brock. I'm on Common Council. I serve with George, and we represent this district. Just to point out, there was a question earlier, where is the city and where is the town? The areas above the site, below the site, and to the left of the site are actually in the city, in addition to the portion that you indicated. I have a couple questions. The first is just based on general numbers. You had mentioned T4 being probably, I'm going to guess, about 12 units per acre. 18 acres, about maybe 223 units. A third of the T5 being residential at about 20 units per acre comes out to about 300 units. So we're looking, guesstimate, about 530 units for this site in terms of residential use. That helps me think about it in some way. It gives me a context in terms of residential impacts on water use, on traffic, and so on. One of the things that we come to experience being on Common Council is an expectation of quality of life. And sometimes the challenges come when you have a low density use, a low density residential use, which abuts immediately upon a high density or mixed use. Sometimes that comes down to issues of noise, of trash, of intensity of the uses. It also can, when you have those two areas butting against each other, it can intend to negatively impact the low density area, drive that out to the point that it soon becomes a high density area because owner occupants will move out, it becomes rental and so on. So when I look at the T5 as it aboves Turner and Hillview, I look at this site and I think of this as predominantly a one-family neighborhood, predominantly owner-occupied, a very fragile and wonderful neighborhood. I say fragile because the other areas of South Hill have lost its owner occupants and become rentals and changed the character. So I do see that you are looking at T5, you're suggesting 6 to 8 stories, mixed use, and I'm very concerned that that abuts so immediately on a one-family neighborhood. I understand that it's attractive because of its proximity to downtown, but I'm concerned of possible negative impacts on the surrounding area that might pressure that area to become more high density and become more renter focused versus what it is now, which is owner occupied one family neighborhood. So I would hope that that area could be looked at very, very thoughtfully in terms of how that area would be developed. The other observation I have in looking at the design is when we talk about traffic impacts, not only the impacts in terms of those who will be living, working, and playing on site, but also traffic impacts of those who will tend to avoid the site because they know everybody's going to work, everybody's coming back from work, everybody's going to a restaurant, and vice versa. And because Aurora is the main thoroughfare into the city, I'm concerned it will drive traffic to the other surrounding areas, Stone Quarry being an obvious first choice, and then other neighborhoods, just to get past the site and get into town without having to basically get past what I appear to think would be the three main entrances and exits to the site, and really no real alternative to those three main exits to the site. So to be very mindful not only of traffic impacts of those on the site, but those who will tend to avoid the site and look for other avenues to get in and out of the city. Those are the two concerns that come at me right now by looking at this project.
Cynthia, you've captured very eloquently the conversation that we'll be having with your committee over the next month and coming months. The character of those surrounding neighborhoods is clearly an issue that we'll look at very carefully. We'll need to look at not just aesthetically, but in terms of our environmental, our impact statement of impacts on those neighborhoods and what our plans will be in terms of any mitigation. And certainly in terms of the transportation issues, you again captured those quite nicely. Not only people coming to and from the site, but those who will be either avoiding it or coming through, and what that means. So we look forward to that conversation. We don't have answers to any of that, of course, right now, but those will be important issues in the coming months.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing. I think so far in the studies that we've done for the new development that might take place on this site, there's very limited new development that would happen actually below the existing buildings. Most of the new development is really going to be better suited to uphill from the existing buildings. So I think that will... Right, okay. I'm thinking you're talking about down by Turner, but yeah, okay. I think of that as not downhill. It's kind of lateral, you know. That's because when you come in that front entrance, you're actually going down the slope as you enter in towards Emerson. So even though it is proximate, I guess you're right. I think of that as kind of on the uphill side of things.
But that does abut those neighborhoods.
But it does. You're right. So okay. So that area would be the place where I think the consideration needs to be very careful. Yeah.
So we do actually have to wrap up because there is a film starting shortly in the cinema. So you're welcome to stay, buy your ticket, and enjoy the film. But you can submit your questions through the website as well, chainworksdistrict.com. There is a form there, and we'll be happy to get back to you with any answers, or on our social media at Facebook or Twitter. So please do stay in touch and submit those questions so that we can get the answers out to everybody.
And for the project team, thank you so much for coming out tonight and sitting through all this. We look forward to a continued conversation.